Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? Today is Wednesday. We are coming towards the end of May, and this is 𝘿𝙧 Dr. D, and this is Q&A with Dr. D. So I'm just gonna get set up here, guys. Allow you guys a little bit of time to come in. Hope everyone is doing well today. How is everyone doing? It's hump day, guys. It's a little bit overcast in Washington, D.C., in the DMV area. How are things on your end? Let me know how it is on your side. How are things going? Hope everything is doing well. So, guys, I'm continuing my wrist and hand series. Today, we're going to be talking about wrist fractures. Very important topic that we need to cover today, guys, and the reason for that is a lot of times we may have a serious injury and not be aware of it, and may chalk it up to being something less serious when it actually is more serious. So I'm going to talk about what that injury looks like and what you need to look out for if you've encountered a situation like that. Okay, really important topic today. I'm going to wait just maybe a few more moments for people to climb in. If you guys are doing well, I hope you're doing well. Comment live if you're on live on Facebook, on IG. I can see you guys. Comment live. Tag someone on this if you think that someone needs to hear this. This is a pretty important topic. Specifically, if you have maybe elderly parents or you're older yourself, this is a really important topic for you guys to pay attention to. All right, so let's dive right in. Let's get started. So, guys, today we're talking about wrist fractures, okay? I'm going to focus my talk today on wrist fractures, the two most common wrist fractures that happened when we're talking about the hand and the wrist. We're going to talk about the distal radius fracture, which is there are two long bones in the forearm that end right here at the wrist, all right? And when the bigger of those at the distal part of the body, the part that's furthest away from the body, the radius gets injured, you have what we call a distal radius fracture. And then we're going to talk about a 𝘿𝙧 fracture, which is one of the bones on the inside of the wrist. For you guys to understand this, it's important for you guys to understand the anatomy. That's why I went over it yesterday, but I'll give you guys a brief overview again of the structures that we're talking about so you can better understand why I'm talking about what we're doing. So this is a little bit of a picture, guys, of the hand, okay? And when we talk about the radius, we are talking about that bone that's highlighted in green, okay? All right, so a distal radius fracture usually happens, both of these fractures usually happens when you've had a fall, okay? The most common fall is if it's something traumatic, you slip and you fall and you put your hand behind you and you try to brace your fall. That's the most common way in which it happens. Hey, David. That's the most common way in which it happens. And in that area, when you have that impact that gets onto the wrist, you can see that there's going to be a lot of pressure that happens right at the distal radius. Hey, David, how are you? Good to see you. Right? So, guys, if you have a fracture in that long bone, you can see that just from the anatomy. And if you just move your own hand around, just move your wrist around, you can go up and down, you can go side to side, and you can even do some rotational component. The radius is very key in just about all of those directions, specifically the rotational component of the hand, okay? So when you've had a fracture in that area, what happens is that there are a couple of things that needs to be evaluated. Of course, you would want to make sure that you do get some medical attention. Go get an x-ray, let's see where the fracture is, because depending on the location of the fracture and how involved it is, no worries, David. Thank you for dropping in. And so according to the location of the fracture and how involved the fracture is it displaced, meaning does it have a crack in the bone and has the bone moved as a result? Or if it's non-displaced, meaning is there a crack in the bone and it hasn't shifted? And there are other different directions or descriptions of what can happen with a fracture. So depending on how involved it is, you may or may not need a surgical intervention, okay? So when you've had a fracture, guys, and you've had a really bad fall on your wrist, it's important first steps first. Do we need to get some surgical eyes on this? The only way for you to figure that out is by getting an x-ray. And that is where a lot of people usually get caught up. You know, they fall on their hand, they have a little bit of pain, and they're like, well, it's not that bad, it's fine. If I hold it like this, you know, if I don't use it, it doesn't hurt. And usually what happens is that you start getting into a situation where you have a fracture that's undiagnosed, which is never particularly a good thing, okay? One thing that you do have to realize, if you've had a fracture, it means that you have injured and you've had a lot of force and energy that has gone through all of the soft tissue in order to get to the bone. The bone is the last line of defense with the body, guys, okay? The muscles, the ligaments, the tendons all surround it. So if you've had a fracture or an injury to your bone, it means that you've had that much force placed in that area. So it's really important to look out for that. With a distal radius fracture, you may have trouble with rotation. Okay, the radius, that long bone in the forearm, is responsible for the rotational components of the arm in terms of turning your hand over and under. So you may find stuff like opening a door might be difficult, okay, or trying to open a jog where you have to get into that rotational component of the wrist. You may find things like that are usually difficult. Weight bearing on your hand usually becomes very difficult. If you're putting your hands down and you're pushing up into a chair, you may find that it's really difficult for you to put weight through that hand, okay? So if you've had some sort of traumatic fall, fallen off of a ladder, I mean, there's several ways. A lot of people slip on black ice. If you're in the US and you're in a cold country, if you slip on black ice and you fall, reach back to try and brace your fall. That is something that also can happen. You do want to make sure that you get an x-ray, okay? Depending on the x-ray and the details of the x-ray, guys, there are a couple of different interventions. Your orthopedic surgeon or orthopedic doctor may choose to put you in a cast, or they may choose to put you in a brace, or depending on how difficult or how involved your fracture is, they may opt to do surgery where they have to put pins and some pins and stuff in there to make sure that the bone is in the correct place so that it heals correctly, okay? After that situation, guys, it is imperative that you do get physical therapy. You want to make sure that you go see a physical therapist that's going to make sure that you get your full range of motion. Healing the bone is one thing. Getting your motion back is a completely different thing. That's the purpose of physical therapy. And when you think about the uses of your hand, and if you have not thought about it, I challenge you to go to for the next hour, stick your hand in your pocket and just use your left hand. If you're right-handed, stick your right hand in your pocket, use your left hand, and try not to use your hand for the next hour. And that will tell you how much you use your hands. We use our hands all the time, guys, okay? So it's really important. It's not enough to just get the bone healed and everything is fine. You do want to make sure that you have your full function of your hand, and you do need rehab for that, okay? So that's a distal radius fracture. Now, guys, we'll talk about the one that's a little bit more dangerous in terms of how it presents, which is a scaphoid fracture. So the scaphoid is one of the small bones or the small carpals that sit at the base of the wrist. It sits right at the base of the thumb, and I'll give you a little bit of a description here. It is, let's see how great my skills are, right there. Good. All right, so if you can see that green bone that's highlighted there for you guys that are on your IG, if you can see that green bone that's highlighted there, that's where the scaphoid lies, okay? So if you're looking at your wrist, guys, and you trace your palm right there, that little weird spot that sits right at the base of your wrist, that's usually where the scaphoid sits, okay? The interesting thing about this bone, guys, that's unique from the rest of the bones in the hand and the wrist, is that it has a pretty poor blood supply. So when it gets injured, it's less likely to heal, okay? So for that reason, if you, for the same mechanism, in terms of reaching out and falling backwards or falling on that hand, even if you fall forward and you fall flat onto your wrist, if you've gotten an injury to that area, you will find that a lot of times it presents as a sprain, meaning that it just feels like you tweaked your wrist and nothing else crazy is going on. But sometimes it can be an undiagnosed fracture, so you do want to pay attention to that, okay? Symptoms that you would notice if you've had something like that: you would get swelling in that area. You might feel like there's a lot of difficulty in terms of gripping stuff, so you want to be aware of that. You may have problems or pain with weight bearing. Again, if you put your hands down onto the chair and push up, or push onto something, or push a heavy door, any pressure or force through that wrist, you may find that you have pain and problems with, okay? If you've had a fall, guys, and again, the way that what we call the mechanism of injury, or the way that this actually happens, is very important in diagnosing some sort of fracture or some sort of traumatic injury to that area. You do want to get an x-ray. So if you've had a fall, or if you've landed oddly on your hand while you were doing something, whether it be accidental or not, you do want to make sure that you get an x-ray, okay? The problem again with the scaphoid, guys, as I said, is that it does have a poor blood supply. And in that case, you have two issues that can happen. If you, and again, depending on the extent of the fracture, do we have a full fracture all the way through the bone? Do we have a partial fracture? Is it fragmented? Is it displaced? All of those things you will be able to figure out with an x-ray. Okay, and if you have that situation, we have two things that can possibly happen. You can have a non-union, meaning that the two edges of the bone don't come together and they don't heal, always very problematic. Or you can have what we call avascular necrosis, which means that the bone tissue itself starts to die. As I said before, the scaphoid notoriously has a poor blood supply, so you have to pay attention to that, okay? Any tissue that starts to die within the body, regardless of the type of tissue, bone, ligament, tendon, muscle, whatever it is, presents itself as a threat to your entire system. As that tissue starts to degrade, it can be toxins and poisonous to you. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything that is degrading or dying, any tissue that's dying in your body, okay? So for that reason, guys, you want to make sure if you've had anything traumatic happen, and this is one of those things where we don't think about it until we think about, oh yeah, I really can't do that. I really can't grip with this hand anymore. I really can't like hold on to my heavy bags. I have to hold everything in my left hand if you've fallen on your right hand. Or I can't push open heavy doors with my right hand. Or if I have to get out of a chair or I have to push myself away, I never use my hand, I use the other side. If you start noticing patterns like that, guys, you want to seek a medical consult. You want to get it looked at. You want to get some eyes on it, because it would be helpful for you, and it's to your advantage and your best interest to make sure that you have eyes on this sooner than later. That's so important. Okay, so I'm gonna go through. Hey Letitia, how are you? Long time no see. So I'm gonna go through here and see if you guys have any questions. If you do have any questions about wrist pain or any sort of fractures, drop it in the comments. I'm just going to check Instagram here to see what we have. Good. So guys, that's about all that I have for today in terms of wrist fractures. Again, the most common thing, if you've had a fall on an outstretched arm, forward, to the side, to the back, fallen off a ladder, slipped on something, slipped on black ice, slipped on a banana peel, slipped downstairs. If you've had a traumatic fall, something that has happened that you did not expect to happen, okay? And you have landed on your wrist and you have consistent wrist pain, you have swelling, it is uncomfortable, and there are certain things that you can't do that you used to be able to do before. Gripping, putting weight on it, okay? Turning things, you know, really using your hand you're unable to do. You want to make sure that you get it checked out. You must go to an orthopedic doctor or a surgeon that will do an x-ray and make sure and scan you to make sure you do not have a fracture. Fractures you want to get ahead of. It is best served sooner than later. If you have a fracture that has been unattended to a long time, it delays the healing process and it complicates the entire rehab process entirely, okay? So I hope that was helpful for you guys. Tomorrow I'll be back here at 4 p.m. Let's just say, hey, we see it a lot in martial arts. Great info. Oh, really? You see it a lot in martial arts. So this is not my population. Tell me more about that, Letitia. With the falls, if someone is throwing someone, you'd probably see a lot of those falls. Tell me a little bit more about that. Do they usually go undiagnosed? I guess would be a great question for you. I'm gonna wait a couple of seconds for you to respond there. So guys, if on Instagram, if you haven't seen it, we got a comment and it's like, hey, we see this a lot in martial arts. Great info. Okay, so if you're a martial artist, and I can imagine you do have to do a lot of, you know, bracing your fall and falling gracefully, or not as gracefully. So it's really important to figure out, I guess, how to fall well. She says capoeira takedowns. Yes, I can imagine, you know, like really figuring out how to lower your body weight very quickly without getting all of that impact to the wrist, I think could be pretty interesting and pretty difficult to do for a lot of people. So it's really important for even that population, and even for the, for the non-sporting people, for the people who didn't have an accident when they were actually performing a sport. For the everyday people, going about their lives and you slip down, like there's something, yes, falling backwards, first thing that goes down are the wrists, exactly. So even like walking down a flight of stairs, guys, and you put your hand out, because you slide quickly, the body, our instinct is usually to protect our head, so we do everything in order to brace that. So the first thing that gets put in the line of fire usually is the wrist. Yeah. All right, so I hope that was helpful for you guys. Shoot me a message if you do have any questions. Thank you for tuning in. Share with someone who you think this would be beneficial for them to hear this information. Tomorrow I will be back with more information about the hand and the wrists. We'll go over maybe 1 or 2 more diagnoses, and then on Friday I will go over a couple of exercises and stretches for the wrist, and that can be done. That will be helpful for you guys to keep your mobility, to keep your strength, and to help with some of the diagnoses that we've been discussing. Next week, guys, I will be interviewing a very special guest. She is a physical therapist also, and she works with musicians, and she has made some time in her schedule. She wasn't able to do this week, but we will get to it next week, Tuesday, where we will be discussing a little bit more about how wrist and hand injuries affect those guys in the performing arts world, which I'm pretty excited about. So make sure you stay tuned for that. So if you have any guys who are in performing arts, this would be really interesting to talk about, okay? So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. All right, have a good one.